Women have been protected by law from discrimination at work because of pregnancy or maternity for more than 40 years. But according to the Equalities Watchdog, many bosses still have attitudes belonging in the dark ages. A survey of more than 1,000 employers carried out for the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that 59% believe that a woman should have to disclose whether she's pregnant during the recruitment process. 36% think it's reasonable to ask a woman about her plans to have children in the future. And 40% claim to have seen a pregnant woman in their workplace take advantage of her pregnancy. Well, to reflect on the findings, we're joined from Dundee by Suzanne Doyle-Morris, who's the chief executive of a company which advises firms on diversity issues. In Essex is the entrepreneur Tina Knight, and here in the studio is Emma Reid, a solicitor with the employment law firm Ergo Law. Thank you all for joining us. Suzanne, were you surprised by the results of the survey?
Surprise is an interesting word. I would like to think that we had moved on. Frankly, like the tens of millions of working women in this country, I'd like to think that in a society where those kinds of questions have been illegal for years and years, that we would have more enlightened employers. So surprised, maybe not, but completely dismayed. I think the only way you can justify asking those types of questions is if we start to ask more round questions of everyone, such as, do you have elderly parents who might need help in the future, or children who may need extra support, or while we're at it, maybe physical issues that you might be hiding from us, or mental health problems, or even an undiagnosed addiction issue, because those are all disruptors to business as well. So singling out working women as maternity time bombs is not helpful in the least.
And Emma, just to be clear, what is the law as regards employers asking women if they're planning to have a family?
Well, the short answer is that you can't ask them that. But as Suzanne says, it's not new law. This is law that's been around for a long time. And what this study that's been published today is talking about is attitudes of employers. And really what it's saying is that they're not keeping up with the spirit of that law. So what the law does is protects vulnerable individuals. Pregnant women are vulnerable. They're out of the workplace for a certain amount of time after they've had their child. And the other thing it does is it encourages us to have the right sorts of conversations. So, for example, around flexible working applications, it encourages us to be open. So, yes, it's not new law. I'm an employment solicitor. I advise people on these issues regularly. We see a lot of pregnancy and maternity discrimination. We get a lot of calls about it.
So people are asking these questions, even though it's breaking the law?
Well, I'm not sure that the calls we get are that sort of issue. I'd say more the issue we see are sort of longer burn discrimination issues, so a vulnerability around the time women return to work, facing redundancy, finding that their job has really diminished or that they've been sidelined. That's more common in terms of the calls that we receive and what we're advising on.
Okay. Tina, do you think that employers should be allowed to ask that question?
Absolutely. I think employers should be allowed to ask any question. The previous speaker said, what about asking about mental issues, physical issues? So all those are questions that any employer would be asking anyway. Since before I started work, always there was a tick box: have you had any medical issues? Is there any disabilities? There is no reason why these questions can't be asked. People are assuming that by asking these questions, that is automatically making the applicant unemployable. That is not the case. One is looking at forward planning. I asked my secretary years ago what her plans were, and she told me quite frankly that she would be looking to start a family in approximately a year to 18 months' time. That was quite fine with me, because at that time I thought, if I got a good year of this applicant, I'm happy about that anyway. I brought out flexible working time before any of this was considered years ago, but it was my choice. And the whole thing is that what is ridiculous about the situation is I am being asked exactly the same questions with exactly the same results of surveys 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Why don't people wake up to the fact that it doesn't matter how many laws you bring in, that is not the answer to deal with this problem. Flexibility and choice for the employer is the answer, and distinguishing that one size doesn't fit all, that large companies can afford to deal with this matter in a completely different way to small companies where this matter affects them more.
Let me put that to Suzanne, that there needs to be a greater understanding of the different demands of small and big businesses.
I think that's a very valid point, that small businesses do have. But I think to assume, do have different issues, but I do think to assume that they can't work around that is hugely unfavorable and also makes big stereotypes about what working mothers are capable of. I'll give you an example from my own small business. 2 of my first hires, one within a few months ended up wanting to go to cycle around China. We took him back when he came back. That wasn't something he disclosed in the interview, but he was the right person. He went away for a few months, came back that much more galvanized. Another wanted to sail around the world, did about for 6 months, and again came back was a fantastic contributor. Those people didn't tell me, and both of those people were men. And I think what's interesting is they came back that much more committed. And if I could say on the opposite end, the most productive member I probably have ever had on my team has been a working mother of 3, because she doesn't have time to waste. She just gets on with the job. So I think assuming that small businesses can't adapt and adapt to the best people for the job is a falsehood, essentially.
Emma, is there any leeway for small businesses in the law?
Well, it doesn't distinguish between big and small, and really I think coming off the discussion that we've heard there, what the law does try to do is prevent people from making assumptions. It tries to stop people from assuming that all pregnant women are going to behave a certain way, all people returning from maternity leave are going to behave a certain way. It wants us to speak to each other, and it puts in place a fundamental, fairly low bar requirement to protect those basic rights of the people who need it most.
Tina, what's been your experience? You gave us one example of an employee of yours that was planning to have a family further down the line. So how has that worked out for you? And when people do come back, are they as committed if they've got family?
Well, all I can say is that she's still with me 17 years later, and I'm the godmother to both her children. So yes, it can work out. What I'm trying to say is that the more rules and regulations you put in, it works against women, and that's the thing I'm fighting for. Because if there is flexibility and choice between the employer and employees, yes, they can work around things. What the problem is, the more laws they put in, the more difficult it is for people to be flexible, and consequently, you then get the point where they're saying, well, it's too difficult, so what we'll do is exclude all women of childbearing age, then we won't get into problems. And that's the thing, that for 30 years this has been going on, and unless we think outside of the box and release some of the draconian laws for certain businesses, leave it to the choice and say, everybody's looking at companies now as if they're mini social services. People do not start up their businesses to become a mini social service. They start up the business to make a profit.
Right, and let me put that point to Suzanne. Isn't that the point about businesses? That businesses have to make a profit. If they don't make a profit, there's no business, and therefore there's no jobs. Suzanne?
I agree completely. So in Scotland here, we have an economy that actually needs to grow, yet we have a declining birth rate that has been declining since 2008, and one of the lowest employment rates among women. So about 70% of women are working, but they're dropping. Now with the Brexit-shaped hole that we're going to have in our economy in the next few years, we need those women not just working, but reproducing. I think what's interesting is that I completely agree with Tina that this is not an issue that's going to be solved by policy alone. It is up to employers to be doing good practice and really modeling healthy relationships with their employees. However, what's really interesting is those employers would do well to remember that interviews are actually a two-way process. And as you're sitting around asking someone, does she have children? Is she planning on having children? You're sending an impression. The person on the other side of the desk is also making a judgment about what kind of employer you will be. And the research shows us, by and large, men and women, millennials in particular, want to spend more time with their children, want to have families, and want to have productive careers as well. But they want to spend a lot more time with their families and have more flexibility than we've ever seen historically.
But briefly
so you
on
need
that
to show
point,
that you're a proactive employer.
Briefly on that point, Suzanne, though, can people have everything? Is that an unreasonable expectation?
So I think that people can have aspects of things all at different times. I'm not sure that people can have everything all the time, but I think this is where the flexibility comes in. And just to regard women of childbearing age, which actually with modern science is a really long period of time, as a problem population does nobody a service.
Emma, let me just touch on are you finding that are women reluctant to come forward if they feel that they've been discriminated against in this issue?
Yeah, I think it's difficult for women to raise these types of issues. And obviously, we only hear from the people who actually pick up the phone to us. I'm sure there's a great deal of people who don't even take that step. And even of the women that do come in and do speak to us, and very often we'll say to them, yes, there has been an issue here, you probably shouldn't have been treated like that. Some of them will say, I just don't have the energy, I don't have the finances, I just want to concentrate on the things that are important to me, which is carrying on in my career and looking after my family, and they have little time to pursue it. And sometimes they just put their head down, they get on with it, and they don't raise issues that they might otherwise do.
It's been a fascinating discussion. I'm sure it could go on, but unfortunately that's time up for us. Thank you all for joining us in Scotland Tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.